Good morning. Good afternoon.
Mhm. Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
I'd like to welcome all of my listeners to Primetime Entrepreneur. We're meeting today with one of the leading African American entrepreneurs with a wealth of knowledge. As she leads the charge for and restoration for the legendary Newark Symphony Hall, which we'll get into today. We'll get into a lot of questions about that today, but I want to welcome the extraordinary talent and the most talented person that I could think of in New Jersey, Ms. Taneshia Nash Laird. How are you doing today?
Jamil, oh my goodness. Thank you for having me. That's quite an introduction I got to live up to.
No problem. I wanted to kind of dive into like your background a little bit. And when you go online and you Google your name, everything comes up for Newark Symphony Hall because you're doing tremendous work there, and it's a legendary institution. And I can't really even tell you how admired I am about all the work that you're doing there. But I don't think that people realize your history, like you have TED Talks, you have so many different interviews that are separate from Newark Symphony Hall. And I think it goes back to about 4 or 5 years ago when I'm starting to see these interviews and starting to see all this advice that you have for women business and Black-owned businesses. And I kind of want to get an idea of like the evolution of your process over the last like 4 or 5 years. Like, when you started thinking about this on the grand scheme of things, I want to start about 5 years ago. And what was the direction, your goals up into this point?
Wow. Okay. So listen, I have to figure out where was I 5 years ago? So 5 years ago, that would have been 2016. I was working as a consultant. I have a consultancy called Legacy Business Advisors, and it was specifically set up initially for one client. A lot of people know this. And that client in 2011 was now, unfortunately, my late husband, but my husband at the time. He was co-founding a pretty big venue in New York City, which is called Mist Harlem. Some people may have heard of it. And I set up this entity just to be a consultant to them. One of the things that they were doing at that time was raising money for Mist. And originally their strategy around raising money was just going to high net worth individuals for venture capital. And we had some relationships. My husband and I have he grew up in Hollis, Queens. So you guys might know some of the famous people that have grown up in Hollis. And I had worked with athletes and entertainers, mostly in PR. But then when they showed me the business plan and said that business was going to create 80 new jobs in Harlem. And I knew that Upper Manhattan had double the unemployment as the rest of New York City. I said, you guys are looking at this all wrong. We should be looking at this as an economic development project. And so subsequently, moving forward to 5 years ago, that was really what I was digging into, leveraging my knowledge as an economic development expert, having been a municipal and state official for economic development, to assist visionary leaders, primarily entrepreneurs of color, on how they can get their big ventures done.
That's a process, and it's all a part of like networking and being able to bring in new people, and it's a very long process. And I'm assuming because of that, you acquired a wealth of knowledge about Black-owned businesses and women business. And I was just doing some data research, and it's like, 40% of U.S. businesses are women-owned businesses, right? And then like there's 12.3, and I didn't even know this before, doing the research. Right, there's 12.3 million women businesses in the country, and they usually outperform men businesses, right? So like.
Yeah. And Black women are the women who are starting businesses at a more rapid pace. But absolutely, if you saw my TED Talk, you will see that I quoted one of, and I want to point out, by the way, again, not a lot of people know this. So I had a different talk prepared. And because I'm crazy, that morning, I totally changed what I was going to say. So most of what I said during that TED Talk was just kind of a talk about the things that I knew. And what I had known is that one of the Shark Tank investors had realized that when he was looking at his portfolio, that all of the women ones outperformed. And there's data now on that goes just beyond those anecdotes. But yes, women are outperformed, and yet women, like minorities, people of color, still have the most difficult time accessing capital for their business.
And that is one of the biggest questions I've had, and that's going to come next. But the question I have about the women-owned and Black-owned businesses is the actual concept about expansion, right? So like, what do you think that these businesses need to be able to expand from startup to mid-level to, major conglomerate? Like, what is missing? Because a lot of times, like, I think that these businesses get stuck in a rut, and they can't really move past where they are, and they can't really provide more jobs and create more revenue. And I want to know from your perspective, what do you think is needed?
So you're talking about scaling, and I definitely think that typically the scaling, to be honest with you, is access to capital and other resources, whether it is, the supply chain, if they are manufacturing, a lot of those things happen in these sort of closed loop, what used to be called, I don't hear the phrase good old boy network anymore, is the way I was. On the other side of 50. But when I was younger, I would hear that a lot, the good old boy network. And, we oftentimes are just not in that network.
Right.
And so what's amazing about this time period is that we're creating our own networks. And I mean, both women and people of color and Black people in specific are creating their own networks. One of my mentees, she thinks she's I'm her mentor, yet she was part of raising $50 million to invest in other businesses, Black-owned businesses. And so I think, especially during this time period where there's sort of a racial, I will call reckoning about
Mhm.
the inequities and access, but I'm still experiencing that to this day as a nonprofit leader, fundraising and seeking to raise $50 million just for the renovation, which we'll talk about later.
Yes.
I still see it, even though I'm in those same rooms, And so what I often have to do is prove that I know what I know just for them to even respect, even though I'm still in those rooms, right? So one of the things that I really think is that we need to get more people into those rooms.
Mhm. So let me ask you this. So that's a really big statement. So do you think that it's a waste of energy to be able to connect with what you like to call the good old boy network, or rather than try to raise capital within your own neighborhood, within your own community?
So I'm going to give you an anecdote of someone that I know and respect. He's an older white man. He's in finance. I didn't know him very well. My late husband knew him because my husband went to an Ivy League school, and one of his Ivy League classmates, who then went on to an Ivy League B school as well, is the managing director of this older gentleman's firm. And so he liked my husband. And after my husband died, although he just knew him socially, he and I met and we talked about doing business together. I introduced this older white man in finance to a celebrity I know, a legendary athlete who I had been business partners with. And this white man said to me, you're only the second Black woman that I've known professionally.
Wow.
Second, right? I could never say that I've only known two white people professionally. And so I say that to answer your question. I think it is possible for us to build our own networks and necessary for us to build our own networks. But I think it's important, from my perspective, to still connect with the wider society, mostly because I think we're owed it, right? I think this country was built literally on Black labor. The
Yes.
wealth in this country was built on Black labor. So we're owed it, right? In that sense. And so I think that is really why, I can continue to seek to access the resources, because otherwise why should I remove myself from an opportunity just
Right.
because from I guess from this idealistic standpoint, oh, we're just going to do it. Well, we can't, because very few of us have been able to accumulate the amount of wealth. You can pretty much tie there's a through line in most of the wealth here in the United States, and it's to the slave trade.
Right.
So, it's impossible for us there have been some of us, there have been, and I probably know a few of them, most of them that I've known are in finance or in tech, that have accumulated some wealth. But at the
Right.
end of the day, they're still benefiting from people whose wealth accumulation ultimately came from the slave trade.
That's
So, yeah.
that's insane. That's insane. Like
It is what it is, right? It is what it is. So I should not remove myself because of some high ideal. I don't think. I think we're owed it. But that I want to just point out is consistent with how I view things, and my personal philosophy, right? I think everybody, whether you realize it or not, have your own sort of mission and values. Recently, um, very recently, as in this week, I found out an organization that views themselves as a competitor to us. I don't necessarily view them as competitor. Tried to take a project that we were working on, and the people who are involved in the project are Black people, and they came to me and told me about this. And you know what I said? I said, if they can offer you more money, take their money. I was like, I'm doing this to create opportunities. So
Right.
to me, that's a compliment that they're coming after you because they know that you guys are working with me. That's the
Right.
whole reason that I'm doing this.
Absolutely.
Ultimately, they said, no, we want to stay with you. And I was like, oh, that's good too, because I don't have the kind of money. But that's why I think we're gonna win, right? I think if you have this abundance mentality instead of a scarcity mentality, and that it's pie and it's crabs in a barrel, I think that's really where that you, before you even realize it, you've lost because
Right.
you're going with that mentality. But yeah, shoot. And I'm gonna tell you, this is probably the second or third time that this has happened, right? So I think it's fine. Um, but you had other questions. I know I'm taking you like
No, no,
way
no,
left.
no, no,
Where,
no. I
where
love
you
it. I
probably
love it.
was
Keep it
trying to
going. I keep it going. I love it.
okay.
I mean, and just to kind of talk about the scarcity versus abundance mentality, that's a huge deal. Like the 10 extra goals, which you are obviously 10 extra your goals for the renovation project that you have there. And to be able to understand there is trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars to be able to have access to. You just have to have the knowledge to be able to have access to it. And I find a lot of times, like, and this is one last question about raising capital, but I find a lot of times, like, there's some things because of who we are, we have to be able to exceed the the personality and exceed the abilities of a lot of people that we're trying to race against. And unfortunately, when we're just based on nepotism, based on a lot of different things, we have our stuff has to be extremely well done and extremely showing an upside for investors to be able to invest. And I just was wondering from a preliminary standpoint, do you think that being able to prepare for an investment, because to me, I think that you can raise money anywhere. There's trillions of dollars
Right.
out there. You can always access the capital. But do you think it starts with the performance of the business plan? Do you think it starts with like being able to get out there and network? Do you think it's like, where do you think the problem is, the secret sauce that people just don't have to be able to raise capital?
Oh, the secret sauce. You must have also seen a quote I put, or maybe you didn't
I've been watching. I've been watching.
Instagram. Are you follow my Instagram too?
Yes, yes.
Because that's the only place I put it, I think. Um, Listen, you just have to be assured what you're offering, right? So be assured of what you're offering and how you differentiate. I think that is one thing that a lot of people ignore. But listen, I've seen mediocre things get funded. It's you just go for it. I think it's all about persistence, right? And just having this go for it mentality. I do have some concerns about that amongst people of color, though, because I'm also concerned about our wellness. And I think oftentimes a lot of that, whether you realize it or not, when you're experiencing this trauma of rejection and people telling you you're less than, that ultimately wears on you. And there are unfortunately some cases now. Some people might say that there might have been some mental illness issues to begin with, because I don't know, but unfortunately I can tell you there are several Black entrepreneurs in particular that from the outside we thought were being very successful, but just the toll that process of fundraising and keeping their businesses afloat in the face of inequity and discrimination
Yeah.
is something real. So where I do think we need each other is that, right? I think, and that is where we really need to kind of lock arms and say, listen, I'm not going to let you fall. You're not going to let me fall. We're going to take our mental health and our well-being is paramount here. That's really what I think you need to dig into your community, because I definitely think, and now, of course, if you know some rich Black people that want to give you money, you take their money too. Take all the money. Take all the money. Listen, I have friends who really had this philosophy that they did not want to take money from other people. I said, that's fine. Whatever your personal philosophy is, it's fine. I know what mine is. Mine is I've advised people, just take the money. I mean, you're going to be in business together. That gentleman that I mentioned, that I'm only the second Black person, he's a Republican. Not only is he a Republican, he's a conservative Republican. And we were talking about doing this business deal with a historically Black business, two historically Black businesses. And what is that? I'm just going to quiz you. What do you think are the businesses that Black people have been in the longest and that perhaps endure to this day?
Oh, God. Great question. I can't even.
I'm going to tell you. Funeral homes.
Yeah,
Funeral homes and life insurance. Remember, once upon a time, we could not even get insurance from white-owned insurers, right? So we had to build our own insurance companies. And then we also had to have our own funeral homes. And so we were looking at doing a deal, believe it or not, within that space, because many of those insurance companies now also have asset management companies, and they're looking at, doing financial management and transactions. And so he and I were talking about in that space. And he said, listen, you could take all your money and do whatever you want, invest in Black businesses. But he's like, I'm going to take my money and do what I want. That's fine. But, but some people, even that might be an issue for them. Some Black friends, I would never do that, something they said with a conservative Republican. And so, but I said, money is money. Now, if he's someone who I believe, and I don't believe, is actively engaged in supporting my oppression, I think he is indirectly, to be honest with you, just because of the things that he espouses and his philosophies and the people that he supports. I do think those people are support, Trump, those sort of folks. I hate to go political. I'm sure that's okay on your podcast. Okay. But I don't think he's actively, he's engaged in it. And so I was okay. Ultimately, the project didn't happen. So, it was a moot point. But by the way, he did introduce me to that other Black woman that he knew, and she's more his contemporary. She's pushing 70 as well. She is high powered, and I consider her one of my mentors right now. She is absolutely one of the leading people in her space in the country. Wow. And so, but it just shows you the level that you have to be at to even interact and engage and meet someone like him. But I'm gonna give you just one final answer. I know this is like, again, going off.
No, this is great information. Thank you.
I don't get to talk about this kind of stuff a lot. So I mentioned earlier that I was in a business partnership with an NBA legend. He's in the Basketball Hall of Fame. And the arena in which he played, which is the Staples Center, the other team, not his team, the other team that plays there, which is the Clippers, they had an issue. They had a Black Lives Matter moment before it was Black Lives Matter. I don't know if you remember that.
The Sterling issue?
Sterling. So the acting person that came in, oh my gosh, Dick Parsons, right? I said, oh, well, do you know Dick Parsons? Because, he's like the acting president of the team now. He's like, no, I don't know him. I couldn't believe that he didn't know. So I got to introduce Dick Parsons in this legend. And I don't want to put the legend on blast. I love him, but it's irrelevant. The point is what he said to me. And he said, Taneshiya, do you know, we don't get to meet a lot of Black people like him. And that is great. And it makes, their network is small. Think about, you're in South Jersey, you said, think about Meek Mill, right? Look at who came to his rescue. The white
owner of the Sixers,
the owner of Sixers, white guys. I could have probably helped him in some way and had some friends who could help him, but we just don't have access. There's no mechanism, no vehicle to introduce high-powered Black people with athletes and entertainers. In fact, the young lady that I mentioned who considers me a mentor, how we met is her brother, who was played for Harvard in the football, but did not go to the NFL. But he played football for Harvard, and then he went, of course, to Wall Street, and then, of course, to Wall Street, and then he became an agent, sports agent. He and I were on a panel together, And that panel was specifically how to connect Black and Latinx professionals to Black and Latinx professional athletes, and how can we bridge that so that we can work together.
Yeah.
But again, the fact that these titans of what they do, their worlds just never intersected was really fascinating to me.
There's a book, it's called The Tipping Point, and it kind of about Malcolm Gladwell, and it starts to talk about like mavens and connectors and stuff like that. And I really do think just the way that you're talking, like you're definitely a connector of that kind of
Oh
people.
yeah, no, yeah.
And that's exactly what I mean. Those you thrive really well in that space, and it's so interesting about the stories that you're telling me and the things that you've done in the past because that's exactly what you do. It's it's such an amazing talent to have that most people just don't have. They can't really see the peripherals on why these two things are going to be make tremendous success.